The wind was already screaming when the whiteout swallowed the valley, and in that instant he knew he had lost her. March 14, 2022. Northern Wyoming. The storm had arrived without ceremony, flattening sound, erasing edges, turning distance into a blank wall of moving white. Snow drove sideways, needling the skin, filling the air with a constant, low roar that felt less like weather and more like something alive. He stood at the edge of the treeline, shoulders hunched, breath fogging the scarf pulled tight across his face, staring into a world that no longer existed beyond a few steps. Somewhere out there, only moments ago, his wolf had been moving through the drifts with the quiet certainty she always carried. And then she was gone. She had never been his in the way ownership implies. She came to him years earlier as a half-grown wolf dog, injured and starving after a wildfire pushed animals down from the high country. He had been living alone then, a seasonal wildlife tracker contracted by the state, spending most of the year mapping migration paths and monitoring predators along the fringes of protected land. He named her Ash for the gray streak along her spine and for the way she had emerged from smoke and ruin, wary but unbroken. Over time, without commands or training, she stayed. She learned his rhythms. He learned hers. They shared space more than life, a quiet coexistence built on trust and distance rather than touch. That morning had begun like so many others. The sky was heavy but calm, the kind of calm that feels borrowed. Ash moved ahead of him through the snow, stopping often, lifting her head to read the air. He followed at a measured pace, boots finding familiar ground beneath a thin crust of ice. The work was routine, checking trail cameras, marking fresh tracks, confirming the movement of links farther north. There was no reason to think the day would end differently than hundreds before it. Then the wind shifted. It came first as a pressure change, a sudden tightness in the ears, followed by a sound like distant surf. The sky darkened, not with clouds but with motion. Snow fell all at once, thick and blinding, and the world collapsed inward. Ash turned back toward him, her ears flat, eyes sharp, already calculating. He raised his arm, a reflex, a signal she usually answered by circling close. For a second, just one, he saw her silhouette through the snow, poised and alert. Then a gust tore between them and she dissolved into white. He shouted her name once, then again, the sound ripped away as soon as it left his mouth. He pushed forward, counting steps, reaching out into nothing. The cold crept in fast, through gloves, through layers, into bone. Every instinct told him to stop, to anchor himself, to wait it out. Losing direction in a blizzard is how people disappear. He knew the stories. He had helped recover what was left of others who made the wrong choice. But still he took a few more steps, then a few more, panic rising despite himself. There were no tracks anymore. The snow erased everything as quickly as it touched the ground. Ash, who could navigate by scent and memory, by subtle shifts in terrain he could barely read on clear days, was suddenly beyond his reach. He made the decision that saved his life and possibly ended hers. He turned back. The cabin was less than half a mile away, a rough structure tucked into the trees, built decades earlier for fire crews and long since abandoned. By the time he reached it, his hands were numb, his thighs burning with cold. He bolted the door, shook snow from his coat, and stood there listening to the storm batter the walls. The silence inside felt wrong without the soft scrape of claws on wood, without the presence that usually settled into the corners of the room like another shadow. He waited. Hours passed, measured only by the dim light shifting behind the frost-clouded window. He rationed the stove, melted snow, forced himself to eat. Every so often he stepped onto the porch and called into the white, knowing it was useless, doing it anyway. The storm did not answer. Night came early, pressing down with a weight that made sleep impossible. He lay on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, listening for a sound that never came. By morning, the blizzard had not moved on. It simply exhausted itself, leaving behind a world buried and altered. Snow lay in smooth, deceptive fields, hiding rocks, fallen branches, the familiar landmarks he used to orient himself. He went out as soon as the wind eased, moving slowly, scanning for any sign of movement, any break in the perfect surface. There were none. No tracks. No fur caught on brush. Nothing. The first day ended with hope thinning into dread. The second day was colder. He widened his search in careful arcs, marking his path, forcing discipline on his fear. Wolves could survive storms like this, he reminded himself. Ash was strong, experienced, tuned to this land in ways he would never be. Still the silence pressed in. Predators had been driven from their usual territories by the storm. Hungry animals would be moving, desperate animals. He found signs of that, scrapes, distant howls carried faintly on the air, but none that belonged to her. By the third day he stopped calling her name. It felt like tempting fate, like acknowledging a truth he was not ready to face. Instead he listened. He watched the edges of the trees, the low places where animals might seek shelter. He slept in short, restless bursts. The cabin felt too large, every corner an absence. On the fourth morning the sky cleared to a brittle blue, the kind that makes the cold sharper. The land glittered, beautiful and merciless. He stepped outside just after dawn, breath steaming, mind already preparing for another day of searching that would likely end the same way. That was when he saw movement at the edge of the clearing. At first he thought it was a trick of light, the way shadows shift over uneven snow. Then it moved again, deliberate, slow. His heart stuttered. Ash emerged from the trees thinner, her coat rimed with ice, eyes fixed on him. She did not approach right away. She stood there, steady despite exhaustion, as if anchoring herself to the ground. Relief surged so fast it made him dizzy. He took a step toward her, then stopped. Something was wrong. She turned her head slightly, looking back over her shoulder into the trees, then forward again, meeting his gaze. She did it once more, a subtle, insistent motion. Her body language was not greeting, not reunion. It was invitation, or warning. Behind her, the forest was quiet, holding its breath. And then, just beyond her shape, for smaller forms shifted in the shadowed snow, their outlines unfamiliar, their presence impossible. He did not move at first, afraid that any sudden shift would break whatever fragile thread had brought her back to him. Ash stood with her weight low, muscles tight, not in fear but in vigilance, as if the clearing itself were something that might lunge if she relaxed. The wind had died completely, leaving a stillness so complete it rang in the ears. Frost clung to the tips of her whiskers. When she breathed, it came shallow and controlled. Only when he lowered his shoulders and eased his hands away from his sides did she take a step forward. It was not the bounding return he had imagined during the long nights of waiting. It was careful, deliberate, her paws finding firm ground before committing her weight. He matched her pace without thinking, mirroring the caution, letting the distance between them close by inches rather than strides. That was when the movement behind her became clearer. For shapes, compact and low to the ground, emerged just enough to be seen. They did not come fully into the open. They hovered at the threshold where shadow met light, their bodies half claimed by the trees. Tufted ears flicked. Short tails twitched once, then stilled. Bobcats. Young but not newborn. Old enough to walk, to follow, to survive, barely. The sight made no immediate sense. Bobcats were solitary by nature. They avoided wolves. Even an adult bobcat would keep its distance from a predator of Ash's size, let alone 4 juveniles moving without their mother. The rules of the forest were clear about such things. Predators did not cross these lines without consequence. Ash glanced back at them again, then returned her gaze to him. There was something different in her posture now, a tension he had never seen before, layered beneath exhaustion. She shifted her weight, placing herself slightly in front of the smaller animals, her body forming a subtle barrier. Understanding did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, like the slow development of an image in a darkroom. He crouched, lowering himself to the cold ground, making himself smaller, less threatening. The bobcats froze completely at the change, their eyes wide and reflective, bodies coiled for flight. Ash did not bare her teeth. She did not growl. She simply held her ground. The quiet stretched. Snow crystals tinkled as they slid from branches overhead. Somewhere far off, a raven called once, then went silent. He noticed then the way Ash's flank shuddered when she inhaled, the way one hind leg favored the other. The blizzard had taken something from her, even if it had not taken her life. He noticed, too, the rawness along her muzzle, the faint trace of blood long since frozen and rubbed away. She had not simply survived the storm. She had moved through it with purpose. The bobcats edged forward a fraction, not toward him, but toward her. They clustered close, their sides brushing her legs, drawing warmth and confidence from her presence. One reached out tentatively with a paw, touching her fur as if to confirm she was real. She did not react beyond a slow blink. He felt a strange pressure build behind his ribs, an emotion too complex to name cleanly. This was not rescue in the way people like to imagine it. There was no dramatic intervention, no clear hero. There was only this improbable alignment of need and instinct. He stayed crouched for a long time. Minutes passed, maybe more. The cold seeped through his knees and into his joints, but he did not shift. He let the animal set the pace, let the moment find its own balance. Eventually, Ash took another step toward him, then another, closing the distance until she was close enough for him to see the fatigue etched into her eyes. Only then did he stand, slowly, carefully, and step back toward the cabin. He did not gesture. He did not call. He simply turned and walked a few paces, then stopped and looked over his shoulder. Ash hesitated, checking behind her, then followed. The Bobcats moved with her, staying tight, their movements quick and nervous but purposeful. Inside the cabin, the air was warmer, heavy with the smell of wood smoke and iron. He opened the door wide and stepped aside, giving them space. Ash entered first, pausing just inside the threshold, scanning every corner. The Bobcats balked at the doorway, unfamiliar with walls and straight lines, with ceilings that closed in overhead. One backed away entirely, disappearing from view for a heart-stopping second before reappearing, pressed close to Ash's flank. She lay down near the far wall, curling her body slightly, creating a hollow of fur and heat. After a long pause, the Bobcats slipped inside one by one, drawn by the promise of warmth. They settled against her without ceremony, their small bodies rising and falling in uneven rhythm. He watched from across the room, careful not to intrude. He fed the stove, added water to a pot, moved slowly, deliberately. Every sound felt amplified. The Bobcats tracked his movements with sharp eyes, but they did not flee. Ash did not lift her head. As the hours passed, something else became apparent. Ash did not sleep deeply. She rested, but her ears twitched at every sound, her eyes opening whenever the Bobcats shifted. It was not the relaxed vigilance of a wolf at ease. It was something closer to watchfulness, a sustained, conscious effort. That night, as the temperature dropped again and the cabin creaked in the cold, he lay awake on the cot, listening to the small sounds of breathing and movement. He wondered where the Bobcats' mother was. He wondered how Ash had found them or how they had found her. He wondered how long this uneasy alliance could last. By morning, the mystery had deepened rather than resolved. Ash rose stiffly, nudging the Bobcats awake with gentle pressure. She moved to the door and stood there waiting. When he opened it, she did not bolt into the snow as she usually did. She turned her head back toward the room, then out again, repeating the same motion he had seen in the clearing. It was the same signal. Come. He followed at a distance that felt respectful rather than cautious, letting Ash set the line of travel. Outside, the morning light revealed how much the storm had rearranged the land. Drifts rose where paths once ran clear. Fallen branches lay half-buried, their familiar shapes softened into pale curves. The air carried a brittle quiet, every sound stripped down to its simplest form. Ash moved slowly, conserving energy. The Bobcats flowed around her like nervous satellites, darting ahead a few steps, then circling back, never straying far. Their small paws left delicate tracks that braided together and vanished almost as quickly as they appeared, the sun already beginning its work. He noticed how often Ash paused, lifting her head, testing the air, checking behind them. Each time the Bobcats froze, mirroring her stillness, learning by watching. They traveled downslope toward a stand of dense timber where the wind had been less brutal. There the snow lay thinner, broken by exposed earth and needles. The smell of animals lingered heavy and layered, telling a story his nose could not fully read. Ash slowed further, her body language shifting. This was not simply a route. It was a destination. He stopped when she did, instinctively. She stood at the edge of a shallow ravine, its sides steep enough to offer shelter from wind but open enough to catch light. At the bottom, a tangle of fallen trees formed a crude barrier. The Bobcats slipped through it easily, disappearing into a hollow beneath the roots of an upturned pine. Ash did not follow. She remained at the rim, looking down then back at him. Her ears angled slightly back, not in submission, but in something closer to uncertainty. He crouched again, peering into the ravine. The hollow was dark, but he could make out movement within it, four small shapes pressing close together. No larger form stirred. No answering presence emerged. The absence was loud. He felt it then, the weight of what was missing. The Bobcat's mother had not survived the storm. Or if she had, she was gone now, driven off or lost in the chaos that followed. The rules of survival were unforgiving. Ash had not crossed paths with them by accident. She had stepped into a vacuum left behind by death or displacement. Ash shifted, favoring her injured leg, and lay down at the edge of the ravine, her body aligned so she could see both him and the hollow below. The Bobcats emerged cautiously, drawn upward by her presence. They climbed until they reached her, pressing against her side, climbing partially over her back, their movements clumsy but insistent. One settled beneath her neck, using her chest as a windbreak. Another tucked in close to her flank. He watched, the moment stretching, the implications settling slowly. This was not a brief convergence forced by weather. It was something ongoing, something Ash had chosen without the benefit of instinctual precedent. Wolves did not foster bobcats. The forest did not make space for this kind of exception. And yet here it was. As the day unfolded, he observed without interfering. Ash did not hunt. She barely moved beyond shifting her weight to ease discomfort. The bobcats, still learning, ventured out in short bursts, practicing small pounces on imagined prey, batting at drifting snow crystals, then returning quickly to the safety of her body. Each time one strayed too far, Ash lifted her head or released a low, almost inaudible sound, not a command but a reminder. They responded immediately. The quiet mystery deepened with each hour. Ash had survived 4 days alone in a blizzard while injured, then returned not only alive but altered. Whatever she had endured had not hardened her. It had redirected her. He noticed how little she ate when he later left a portion of dried meat at a careful distance. She sniffed it, took a few mouthfuls, then turned away. The bobcats watched intently, their hunger obvious, their ribs faintly visible beneath spotted fur. Ash did not push the food toward them. She simply stepped aside, creating space, allowing them to approach on their own terms. They did, tearing at the meat with awkward urgency. The gesture unsettled him more than any dramatic act could have. It was not protection through force. It was facilitation. She was not replacing their mother. She was holding the world steady long enough for them to survive. As afternoon slid toward evening, a distant sound carried across the trees. A howl, low and searching, answered moments later by another farther off. Ash's head snapped up, ears forward, body tensing. The bobcats froze, pressing close. This was the danger he had been waiting for. Other wolves moving back into territory emptied by the storm. Curious, hungry, unbound by whatever quiet vow Ash had made. She did not rise to meet the sound. She did not answer it. Instead, she turned her head slightly, angling her body more fully between the ravine and the open forest. It was a subtle shift, almost nothing. But it changed everything. The bobcats disappeared back into the hollow, as if they had rehearsed the movement before. Ash remained, eyes fixed on the trees, breath slow, measured. The howls faded. Whether by distance or decision he could not tell. When night came, it did so gently, a wash of blue settling over the land. He returned to the cabin alone, reluctantly, knowing better than to force closeness now. He left the door open longer than necessary, listening. Hours later, long after the stars had sharpened overhead, he heard soft movement outside. In the morning, the tracks told the story. Ash had brought them back again. By the 4th day after her return, the pattern was undeniable. Ash no longer moved like a lone animal passing through shared space. Every choice she made now bent around 4 smaller lives that were not her own. Her routes shortened. Her pauses lengthened. The way she read the land changed, no longer scanning wide horizons but checking low places, listening for the soft, uneven sounds of inexperienced movement behind her. He began to see the cost of it. Her injured legs stiffened more each morning. When she rose from rest, she did so slowly, weight shifting carefully, a brief tremor running through her frame before she found balance. She hit it well, but he had learned her rhythms over years, and the deviations stood out sharply. She was burning energy she did not have, spending strength that would not easily return. That afternoon, the weather shifted again. Not into violence, but into something more dangerous, false calm. The sky clouded over, the air growing heavy, the kind of stillness that often preceded movement from other predators. The storm had cleared corridors that were now filling back in. Tracks appeared where none had been before. Coyotes. Another wolf pack moving south. Signs of a mountain lion along the ridge. He felt the pressure building before Ash did. When she caught the scent, it hit her like a physical blow. Her head snapped up, body locking into sudden stillness. The bobcats froze instantly, instinct flaring through them despite their youth. One made a soft, involuntary sound, a thin note of panic that vanished as quickly as it came. Ash did not bare her teeth. She did not bristle or growl. Instead, she turned in a tight circle, her movements clipped, efficient, her eyes darting between the forest edge and the ravine. This was calculation, not fear. The hidden truth surfaced then, quietly and without ceremony. Ash could not protect them forever. He saw it in the way her tail dropped, in the way her stance lacked the grounded confidence she once carried. She was outnumbered by time, by hunger, by the simple math of survival. Wolves survive by movement, by range, by strength in numbers or isolation. What she was doing now violated every one of those principles. The bobcat sensed it too. They pressed closer than before, their bodies tight against her sides, seeking reassurance she could no longer fully give. One climbed partially onto her back, claws catching briefly in her fur. She flinched, not from pain but from effort, and then settled again, holding herself steady. That was when he understood his place in this story. He had spent years believing his role was to observe, to document, to leave as little imprint as possible. But this was not a situation that would resolve on its own. The balance had already tipped. Doing nothing now was not neutrality. It was a decision. He moved carefully, slowly, making sure Ash tracked every step. He did not approach the Bobcats directly. Instead, he widened the circle, placing himself between the ravine and the deeper forest, his presence altering the shape of the clearing. He fed the stove back at the cabin, letting smoke rise, letting scent carry. He placed food farther from Ash than before, then farther still, creating distance, space, options. The reaction was immediate. Ash watched him with an intensity that bordered on suspicion. Her ears angled back, then forward again. She stood, testing her leg, pain flashing across her face before she masked it. She looked at the Bobcats. Then she looked at him. It was not a plea. It was an evaluation. He stayed where he was, grounded, non-threatening, his movements slow enough to be read clearly. The Bobcats crept forward, drawn by hunger more than trust. They reached the food first, tearing at it with sharp urgency. Ash followed last, stopping several feet short, scanning constantly. She ate only after they did. As daylight faded, the sounds returned. This time closer. A low call from the trees answered almost immediately. Not a challenge. A location check. Others were near. Ash lifted her head and, for the first time since her return, released a sound of her own. It was not a howl. It was softer, shorter, unfinished. It carried no claim, no invitation. The forest answered with silence. That night, she did not lead the Bobcats back toward the ravine. She brought them to the edge of the clearing and stopped. Snow began to fall again, light and dry, whispering down from the dark. The cabin stood behind him, a block of human certainty in a world that rejected permanence. Ash lay down and curled her body tightly, drawing the Bobcats in. They pressed against her, breathing fast, small hearts working hard. He could see the strain in her now, the shallow rise and fall of her chest, the way exhaustion hollowed her eyes. This was the twist that hurt. She had not brought them back to him for shelter alone. She had brought them back because she was running out of time. He did not touch her. He did not cross the last few feet between them. Instead, he sat on the ground, mirroring her stillness, sharing the cold, sharing the weight. The night stretched long and quiet, broken only by the soft sounds of snow and breath. By morning, the decision would no longer be hers alone. Morning arrived without color. The sky was a flat, uncommitted gray, and the snow that had fallen overnight softened every edge it touched. The clearing looked smaller somehow, as if the forest had leaned in while he slept. He woke stiff and cold on the cabin floor, his body mirroring the ache he had been watching in Ash for days. She was already awake. Ash stood at the edge of the clearing, facing outward, her back to the cabin, the Bobcats tucked behind her in a tight cluster. They had learned the shape of safety now, learned where to stand, how to stay small. One of them shifted and pressed its face into her fur, kneading slightly, a reflex left over from a time that already felt distant. She absorbed it without reaction, her focus fixed on the trees. The air smelled wrong. It wasn't a single scent but a convergence, layers of presence settling into the land. Wolves, at least two, maybe more. A cat, large and confident, moving somewhere upslope. Hunger threaded through it all. The storm had reset the board, and now everything was converging toward the same thin resources. Ash turned her head once, glancing toward the cabin, then back again. It was not the signal he had seen before. This was not come. This was something heavier. He stood slowly, careful not to startle. The Bobcats noticed immediately, their bodies tightening, eyes tracking him. Ash did not move. She let him approach to the edge of her space, closer than she usually allowed. Close enough for him to see the fine tremor running through her front leg as she shifted her weight. This was the moment of sacrifice, though it did not announce itself as such. He had choices. None of them were clean. Intervention carried risk. For him, for Ash, for the Bobcats. Non-intervention carried certainty. He thought of the rules he had lived by for years, the discipline of distance, the belief that the wild corrected itself without witnesses. Standing there now, those rules felt thin, insufficient for the reality in front of him. He turned away from them and walked back toward the cabin, his steps measured, deliberate. He gathered supplies quickly, the emergency flare gun, a radio with limited range, food. He did not look back until he was ready to move again. When he did, Ash was watching, her head slightly lowered, eyes following every motion. He walked past her then, not stopping, not reaching out, placing himself between the clearing and the treeline. He planted his feet and waited. The first sound came from the north, a low rustle, the unmistakable shift of something large moving through brush. He raised the flare gun slowly, not aiming, just holding it where it could be seen. The smell of human presence thickened the air. Smoke drifted from the cabin chimney behind him, a steady, unnatural line rising into the still sky. Ash did not retreat. She did not advance. She simply held her position, her body a living barrier, her eyes never leaving the space beyond him. A shape appeared briefly between the trees, then vanished again. Another followed. He heard breath, felt it more than heard it, the subtle compression of air that precedes movement. His heart beat hard but steady. He stayed where he was, making himself obvious, unignorable. Minutes stretched thin. The bobcats made no sound. They pressed into Ash's fur, small bodies rigid with instinct. One lifted its head just enough to peer past her shoulder, then tucked itself away again. Ash's ears flicked once, twice, then settled. The pressure eased gradually like a tide pulling back. The forest did not announce its decision. It simply shifted its attention elsewhere. The shapes withdrew. The air loosened. Sound returned in fragments, the faint drop of snow sliding from a branch, the distant wing beat of a bird testing the quiet. He lowered the flare gun but did not move. Only when the clearing felt empty again did Ash release a breath so deep it seemed to drain her. Her legs buckled slightly just for a moment before she steadied herself. The bobcats stirred, sensing the change, confusion replacing fear. He stepped back then, slowly, giving her space to read what had just happened. She looked at him, really looked, her gaze steady and searching. There was no gratitude in it. No acknowledgement in the human sense. There was something else, recognition of altered ground. The rest of the day passed in fragments of motion and rest. Ash lay down more often now, no longer trying to mask the pain. The bobcats explored in tighter circles, never straying far, their energy uneven, fueled by youth and urgency. He brought food again, closer this time, placing it where Ash would not need to move far. She allowed it. She ate sparingly. The bobcats ate more. As evening approached, the sky cleared again, stars sharpening into focus. The cold returned with precision. Ash rose one last time and guided the bobcats toward the cabin, stopping just outside the threshold. She did not enter. She lay down in the snow instead, curling her body around them, her back to the door, her face toward the forest. It was an unspoken choice. He stood in the doorway for a long time, the warmth behind him, the cold in front. He understood then that safety in this moment did not mean shelter. It meant position. It meant presence. Ash had placed herself where she needed to be, and she expected him to do the same. He closed the door behind him and sat in the snow a short distance away, mirroring her line, sharing the night. The stars burned quietly overhead. The land held its breath. By dawn, something would change. Dawn arrived quietly, as if the land itself was reluctant to disturb what had settled overnight. The stars faded without drama, and the gray light returned, thin and cold, spreading evenly across the clearing. Frost glazed the snow where he had sat through the night, his breath having risen and fallen in steady, controlled clouds. He stood slowly, joints protesting, and turned his attention first not to Ash, but to the forest beyond her. Nothing moved. The absence of sound felt deliberate now, not empty but resolved. Whatever had circled the night before had gone on, drawn elsewhere by hunger or chance or the subtle message left behind by human smoke and quiet defiance. The land had recalculated. Ash was still curled around the bobcats. She had not shifted position. Her chest rose and fell shallowly, each breath measured as if taken with care. The bobcats slept hard, tangled against her, small bodies finally surrendered to exhaustion. One lay half on her shoulder, another pressed beneath her neck. Their ears twitched occasionally, chasing dreams shaped by instinct rather than memory. He approached only when the light was strong enough to make his outline clear. Even then he stopped several feet away. Ash's eyes opened at once. She did not lift her head. She simply watched him, alert despite fatigue, reading his posture, the angle of his shoulders, the speed of his steps. He crouched in the snow. The moment stretched, fragile and balanced. This was where stories usually end, with rescue claimed or danger past. But this was not an ending shaped for comfort. It was a hinge. Ash shifted slightly, a quiet effort that cost her more than she wanted to show. One of the bobcats stirred and woke, blinking in confusion, then immediately pressed closer to her warmth. Ash lowered her muzzle and touched the top of its head once, a brief contact almost imperceptible. She did not repeat it. Then she did something he had never seen her do before. She turned her head away from the forest and toward the cabin. It was not the sharp, insistent signal she had used before. It was slower, heavier. She looked at the door, then back at the Bobcats, then at him. Her ears settled into a neutral position, her body no longer angled outward in defense. The meaning was not explicit. It didn't need to be. She was done holding the line alone. He stood and opened the cabin door wide, stepping aside completely, removing himself from the threshold. Warm air spilled out, carrying the smell of wood smoke and iron. He backed away, giving space, letting the choice remain hers. Ash watched for a long moment. The Bobcats shifted, sensing the change, their bodies stirring with uncertainty. One took a tentative step toward the open doorway, then froze, startled by the unfamiliar geometry of it. Ash did not rise immediately. She waited until all four were awake, until they were watching her. Then she stood. The effort was visible this time. Her injured leg shook just slightly before locking into place. She did not hesitate after that. She walked toward the cabin at a steady pace, slow but committed. The Bobcats followed, clustering close, their movements quick and uneven. At the threshold, Ash paused once, scanning the interior, reading the space the way she read terrain. She stepped inside. The Bobcats spilled in after her, startled by the enclosed warmth, then settling almost immediately as the cold left their fur. Ash crossed the room and lay down near the far wall, positioning herself as she always had, able to see the door, the corners, the ceiling. The Bobcats pressed against her without question. He closed the door softly. The day unfolded without drama. He kept the stove fed, the room warm but not stifling. He moved carefully, always within her sight line, always predictable. Ash slept in fragments, waking often, adjusting her position when pain demanded it. The Bobcats explored in short bursts, their confidence growing by inches, then returning quickly to her side. As hours passed, something subtle shifted again. Ash no longer rose when he moved. She no longer tracked every sound. Her vigilance softened, not into weakness but into trust. The burden she had carried since the storm eased fraction by fraction, transferred not through touch or training, but through shared presence. That evening, just before dusk, Ash stood and moved toward the door. The Bobcats followed, uncertain but curious. He opened it without prompting. Ash stepped out alone. She stood in the snow for a long moment, breathing in the air, reading the land one last time. The forest stood quiet, unchallenging. She did not look back immediately. When she did, her gaze passed over the Bobcats, then rested briefly on him. There was no farewell in it. She turned and walked toward the trees, her gait uneven but steady, disappearing into shadow without ceremony. He did not follow. He did not call after her. Some departures are not meant to be interrupted. The Bobcats waited at the threshold, confused, bodies angled toward the place she had vanished. They did not cry out. They did not chase. They stood together, for small shapes in a world that had just shifted again. He closed the door and sat on the floor nearby, staying present, letting the quiet do its work. In the days that followed, arrangements were made. Calls placed. Care transferred carefully, legally, quietly. The Bobcats would be relocated, raised, released when the land was ready for them again. Their story would never be public in detail. Most of what mattered could not be proven anyway. Ash did not return. But sometimes in the early mornings, when the light cut low across the snow and the forest breathed in unison, he would find tracks near the edge of the clearing. Not close. Never crossing the boundary. Just enough to mark presence. The storm had taken many things. What it left behind was harder to name. A reminder that compassion does not belong to one species, that survival is not always solitary, and that sometimes the truest acts of love in the wild are the ones that end in letting go.